In the 1930s, the world learned that Robert Townsend was George Washington's spy. Today, many visitors come to Raynham Hall Museum to learn about this famous son of the Townsend household. But Robert wasn't famous in his own lifetime. In fact, he lived a rather quiet life after the war. By far the most prominent and successful child in the family was actually their eldest son, Solomon. Solomon was born in 1746 in Oyster Bay. His father was a successful merchant and owner of several large sailing vessels. These ships made regular trips to the West Indies, buying and selling all sorts of foods and household goods. In 1753, his father built a new boat and named it the sloop Solomon. In one of his father's record books, we can see in a child-scrawled handwriting, Commander Solomon. At a very early age, young Solomon was dreaming of a life at sea. He went to school at St. George's Academy in Hempstead, learning basics like reading and writing, but also studied Latin, Greek, mathematics, and navigation. According to family legend, at age 14, Solomon became a cabin boy on one of his father's ships, where he spent many months away from home, learning the family business while on long and often dangerous voyages at sea. He must have learned his lessons well, because when he was just 22 years old, he became captain of another of his father's ships, this one named after his little sister, the brig Sally. This ship, a double-masted brigantine, had a crew of 10 men and went north to Quebec and south to the Carolinas, and also the West Indies, visiting Antigua, Jamaica, and Honduras. They also journeyed across the Atlantic to England, Ireland, and Portugal. For 5 years, Solomon captained successful voyages for his father, sometimes returning home. And in 1770, his captain's cabin was robbed while the Sally was anchored in New York Harbor. This ad, promising $10 reward, gives a list of Solomon's stolen possessions, including silver teaspoons, engraved sugar tongs, Shakespeare's plays, a mariner's compass, and considerable wearing apparel. Several years later, there were 2 tragic deaths at sea, both young cabin boys, within months of each other. In his logbook, Solomon recorded the first incident in October 1772. At 1:30 a.m., Richard Bunn, a young lad belonging to the vessel, fell from the main shroud near the top, down on the quarterdeck, and bruised himself so much that he died immediately. Then, just a few months later, in January of 1773, he wrote, "At 10 a.m., Edward Davis, an apprentice boy to me, fell from the mizzenmast into the sea. Got the yawl out, endeavoring to save him, but all in vain. He drowned before we could get to him." Of course, Solomon had been a young cabin boy himself, just 10 years before. In 1774, when he was 28, Solomon became captain of a much bigger ship, owned by the Buchanans, a wealthy family that was deeply connected to the Townsends through both marriage and business. This vessel, the ship Glasgow, had 3 masts and held 3 times as much as the Sally, with a crew of 17 men. Solomon traveled to many of the same ports, and new ones as well, including Scotland and Spain, importing fabrics, wine, molasses, and a variety of earthenware and glassware. And in 1775, he carried a cargo of refugees, over 250 men, women, and children who were fleeing from the highlands of Scotland for a new life. In America, the Revolutionary War had begun following the battles at Lexington and Concord. But far across the sea, this impoverished group of Scottish immigrants could not be convinced of the dangerous conflict that had begun. According to one account, they would give us no cause for leaving their country, but that they found themselves poor and were determined to go abroad. And though they were repeated times told of the rebellion in some of the colonies, they did not seem to be moved, saying that they did not think themselves in any danger of being forced to serve in His Majesty's troops. And this morning they sailed, with a fair wind and in very good spirits. However, when Solomon arrived in New York Harbor in November, they were boarded by the British warship the Asia, and all the men and boys were forced to join the British Army. Solomon himself was also forced into His Majesty's service and ordered to sail the ship to Boston, though a fierce storm was raging. In January, Solomon was ordered to sail for Jamaica, so despite the winter weather and damage to his ship, he left, no doubt greatly relieved to be out from under the British Navy's scrutiny. From here on out, the Glasgow had to travel under convoy, and she was fitted with guns and cannon. Back in Oyster Bay, his father, a known patriot, was arrested by the British and was being taken to prison. Samuel was saved by Solomon's boss, Thomas Buchanan, a known loyalist, who paid several $1,000s to secure his release. During the next year, Solomon made another long trip from London to Quebec and back again, but this would be his last. Like his father, Solomon was a patriot, and he could no longer sail under a British flag. In London, he settled the ship's accounts and then traveled to Paris, where he became acquainted with none other than Benjamin Franklin. His son recalled, "I have heard my father relate an anecdote of the Republican simplicity of that great man. Calling on him one morning rather early, Dr. Franklin came out of his room undressed, in his breeches in fact, and apologized to my father, bidding him at the same time not to go, as he would join him in a few moments." Franklin had more to offer than friendship. He was able to give Solomon a way to return home under an American flag by administering an oath of loyalty. This certificate, only recently discovered through an online auction, certified that Solomon had taken the oath of allegiance to the United States of America. With Benjamin Franklin's signed oath in hand, in 1778, he boarded the Continental frigate Providence and returned to Boston. Because the British had occupied all of New York and Long Island, Solomon couldn't return to his family or his brother Robert. Instead, he spent the final years of the war at his cousin Peter's house in Chester, New York. Peter Townsend ran a large iron forge and had made an enormous iron chain for George Washington. This great chain was stretched across the Hudson River at West Point to prevent British warships from sailing upstream. Solomon learned the iron business from Peter and also fell in love with Peter's daughter Anne, who was 20 years his junior. In 1782, with the end of the war in sight, they were married. The iron business became Solomon's second career, and he established two large iron forges, one in Orange County, New York, and another on Long Island near Riverhead. He also had a large anchor shop in New York City, selling to ship's captains and the U.S. Navy. He and Anne had 11 children, although 3 died in childhood. His large household, which included as many as 16 slaves, had residences in New York City, in Chester, and occasionally rented a house in Oyster Bay. Besides his iron business, he had a large farm and shipped produce and iron products in a small fleet of coastal sloops that he owned. Solomon spent a great deal of time traveling between these businesses, and also frequently traveled to Albany. In 1801, he was a delegate to the New York State Constitutional Convention. Following in a long tradition of Townsend's, he entered politics and was elected as a New York State Assemblyman for 5 terms. He was serving in Albany at the State House when he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage in 1811 and died at age 64. The entire Senate of New York attended his funeral, and he was buried in Albany, though many years later his body was returned to the family graveyard in Oyster Bay. When his widow, Anne, settled his estate, she discovered that for all his hard work and commercial success, at his death he was penniless. The Jefferson trade embargo had decimated his business, which relied on shipping for the sale of iron anchors. Also, the U.S. Navy, which had commissioned him to outfit the frigate President with ironwork, had never paid him for his work. Many years after his death, the Navy finally agreed to pay a settlement to the family. Though today his life is mostly forgotten, he left a powerful legacy. His youngest son, Solomon II, also a successful merchant and politician, bought back the building we now call Raynham Hall from an in-law and made it his home. His son Peter, who wrote avidly of family history, remembered Solomon as a man of strong mind, excellent common sense and spotless honor, of moral bravery and resolution surpassed by no man. Proud he was and passionate, but generous and hospitable to a fault.